Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of How to Live to 200. Woo! It has been a busy last couple of months. We've recorded a ton of new guests with really interesting stories and backgrounds, but as you know, this is a side project for all of us, so finding the time to research and record, edit, produce, and ship these episodes has proven pretty challenging for us. I've been really fortunate to be looking at some really cool quantified health projects and investments here at Pioneer Square Labs. Lauren's got a sweet new job at Facebook, and Kevin's making the design world better for lots of those companies out there at Envision. So we're staying pretty busy on our day jobs, but we're getting back in the rhythm and on track, so lots of new shows are coming out soon. And I want to give a special shout out to Lean Cowis, who recently won the GeekWire Startup CEO of the Year Award. As you might recall, she was a guest on the show last fall and told us about her company's research on our aging brains and specifically around Alzheimer's. It's pretty awesome to see the work that they're doing, and it's really nice to see her recognized for her great leadership. On today's episode, I had the opportunity to talk with Phil White. He's an Emmy-nominated writer who co-authored his most recent book, Waterman 2.0, with famed mobility and CrossFit legend Kelly Starrett. In this episode, we focus on what Phil describes as the other 22 hours, or how you're spending your time when you're not doing physical activity. Why he believes that one 17-hour fast per week is enough to give you the benefits of longer fasts, or some of the interesting, and I do mean interesting, breathing techniques he uses while working out or winding down before sleep. I learned quite a few new things during this session, and I think you will too. And thanks again for listening, and we're excited about the releases of upcoming episodes, including Christoph Koch, the president of the Alice Institute for Brain Science, where we discuss the frontiers of brain science and some heavier topics such as death. But for now, this is How to Live to 200. So Phil, welcome to the show.
Oh, thanks so much for having me. Pleasure's all mine.
I know we have a few things in common as both being watermen, or at least interested in the water, and our relationship with Kelly Starrett. So maybe you can tell us how you came to know Kelly and how you wrote the book Waterman.
Sure. Well, Waterman 2.0 is really a 6 or 7 year journey now. So I was given the health and fitness beat by Joe Carberry, who is one of the founding editors of Sup the Mag, which is the kind of stand-up paddleboarding companion in the same media group as Canoe and Kayak, and also the legendary Surfer magazine. And so I jacked up my back deadlifting, and I was really trying to find ways other than the twofold traditional Western medicine approach of either pills and or surgery. And at the time, or I would say at the time, we've always had crappy health insurance. And so I knew it was going to be expensive. It felt like a grenade going off in my lower back. And so I did a lot of digging online and came across Mobility WOD's daily videos, which was back when it was Kelly and Juliet and some of the other coaches in the parking lot of dreams, as they called it, before they even had the indoor facility there, San Francisco CrossFit. And really just from putting into practice Kelly's protocols for the hip, for the low back, for the glutes and hamstrings, I was able to really sort this back injury out without having to go down that surgery or painkiller route. And so I just pitched Joe on, can I do a Q&A with this guy, Kelly Starrett? And I gave him a bit of background on how Kelly had, without knowing me, helped me through this injury, kind of the tribe of mentors idea, I guess, from Tim Ferriss. And I don't think he really got the whole movement quality and mobility piece, but Joe, pretty amiable chap. And so he said, sure, go ahead, do the Q&A. And so emailed Kelly, and he was kind enough to write back. And so we did a Q&A, ended up doing an exclusive video for Sup the Mag as well on paddling position, just terms of staggering your feet so you can get a little more torque through the hip, and then did some mobilizations through the shoulder for us. And then we just kept in, got on really well and kept in contact. And at this point, he was working on the book Ready to Run with TJ Murphy, which is really his movement and mobility principles for as the name sounds, runners. And so we got to the point of, well, why don't we do a similar book for rowers, surfers, and paddlers of all stripes.
And what are the most common sort of things that people take away from the Waterman book and Kelly's work? And maybe just before we get into that, for those who don't know, Kelly Starrett runs San Francisco CrossFit. He's a friend of mine and clearly of Phil's, and also runs the mobility WOD. So early on, getting people into mobility training or workout of the day, and super early on in CrossFit, and does a ton of great videos, content in this category. But as you think about the Waterman 2.0 book, what would be the quick summary of the things that everybody should take away from that book?
Yeah, I mean, I think, again, we explore some of these fundamental shapes, which you're going to hit in paddling, surfing, and rowing. So everything, in rowing, from more of a mid-level push and pull to the shoulder being in an overhead position, whether you're swimming after you got thrown off your board, if you're a surfer, or you paddle in the ocean, or your stand-up paddling is more of that overhead shape, and partially so in canoeing and kayaking. So there's some positional pointers there of how to position yourself with integrity so that you don't break down under higher mileage. And then also there are techniques to help yourself after the fact. So when you're sore and or injured, different ways to address problems at the hip, the shoulder, the elbows, the hands. And so really we look at it from two different perspectives, like head down. So we do a lot of head position and neck, that kind of thing, which obviously in today's day and age with text neck and these various things, that's a challenge that we all face because we're conforming to our environment and to our devices anyway. And then we go exacerbate some of those problems on the water. So everything from head down and then working the other way up, because if your feet are in a bad position, either in the gym or on the water, there's going to be this, as Kelly would say, like a cascade of suck that travel, excess tension really, and misalignment. So if, say, for example, one foot is either pigeoned or ducked, so i.e. it's not straight or close to straight, that's going to cause you to compensate then at the ankle, the knee, the hip. Then further upstream, we're going to start to see some problems at the spine and all the way up into the middle and upper or back, shoulder area, neck, that awful kind of headache that you get where there's tension along the back of your head in the occipitals and those other muscles there. And so really what we're doing with the positional stuff is trying to make sure the fires don't break out in the first place. And then as and when they do break out, we're giving you some of the movement and mobility pointers for how to extinguish the flames.
What are the 2 or 3 things that everybody listening should be doing when they're thinking about their office space or otherwise? And, most of the people listening to the podcast are pretty good about their body. They're pretty well informed, but there are probably 1 or 2 things that are either on hip flexibility, mobility, lower back, or potentially even knees for all of us who are now in our 50s who have beaten our bodies pretty hard. What are the 2 or 3 things they should be doing on a daily basis to improve flexibility, mobility in those key areas?
Yeah, I mean, I think as my other co-author, Fergus Conley, who I co-wrote the book Game Changer with, and then there's a new one out called 59 Lessons as well. He says it's about the other 22 hours, right? And what he means by that is that the pro and college teams that he has worked with over the years, whether that be NFL, rugby, pro rugby in the UK, these various sports, that they spend, baseline around 2 hours a day practicing. And then obviously they have their own trainers and coaches that they do additional stuff with. But really, that holds for the rest of us. So you could go in and sell your soul at Soul Cycle. You could cross yourself in knots at CrossFit. You could do this really hard workout. And even if you're doing it with near perfect form, and you're warming up and cooling down well, maybe you're doing a bit of mobility afterwards to help yourself cycle back down. If you then go and sit for, 6 out of the next 8 hours, you're really going to shut down a lot of the processes regarding the adaptation from that workout. And there are some experts, one being at NASA, and then another guy called James Levine from the Mayo Clinic, that has written a book about NEAT. And really NEAT is, I'm going to butcher the acronym, but it's the thermogenesis, the calorie burning, essentially activities within the body that take place as a result of all the daily movement that you accumulate. And so his point is, and Kelly's too, that it's even if you have a standing desk, as I do, it's not enough to just work out hard, train multiple days a week, be pretty active, play a sport, whatever it is, and have a standing desk. Because even, as full confession, this morning when I was working on a blog post for a client before this call, I realized, oh crap, I've literally been standing in the same place for 2 hours. Now I've got a little, I've got the Rogue fidget bar that kind of swings underneath your desk to get a little micro movement in. I've got various balls and rollers and stuff I can roll my feet over. But the reason I was late for this interview is I was doing some push-ups and some air squats because I just needed to get the blood flowing again. And sometimes we need systems around this. So, there are multiple apps. I think there's one called Get Up or Stand Up or something Bob Marley related, to remind you to get up and take a movement break every 20 or 30 minutes. And if you're lucky to work from home like me, you could put a jump rope or a kettlebell or something like that in the corner, which would be another visual reminder. And also just try to build in the daily habit of taking a 30 to 40 minute walk, I think is a real big one, both in terms of upping that NEAT score and that, movement related thermogenesis. But also just, Stephen Kotler and Jamie Wheel and their flow research have found that taking a daily walk really slams you into a flow state, because a lot of those flow triggers like novelty, complexity, unpredictability are found in nature. And so you don't have to be hurtling down the face of a 60-foot wave or in Colorado, a big mountain to get into that flow state. And so really just taking a daily walk would be another. And then I guess the third would be, as Kelly would say, just do 10 minutes of mobility a day, every day. And so that could be, again, working from head to toe or vice versa, or it could be simply targeting the major muscle groups and joints that you've used during that day's workout. And I think if you do those three things, so to summarize, number one, build in plenty of movement throughout your day to supplement your workout or your sporting activity. Number two, take a daily walk, 20, 30, 40 minutes a day. And number three, do 10 minutes of mobility work a day, every day. That's really going to help with all those creaky bits.
Yeah, I'll add a few things that have worked really well for me. So I'm 6'4", also have a bad back and have blown that out a couple times, and I'm a big fan of Kelly's work. So adding the walking one-on-one. So a lot of my one-on-one management meetings are now walking meetings. Those get me outside and get a little bit of in the day. Two is in the afternoon, I like to have an espresso or cappuccino, and I try to walk out to a coffee shop to get that, even though we have it in our office. Three is I've added one of those sort of pads underneath my standing desk. So instead of standing on a hardwood floor, I stand on a softer pad, which forces me to move a little bit in and of itself. And then I've also got a tennis ball and a racquetball, which sometimes I'll put underneath my feet and just play around a little bit, which forces the back and forth of the hip stretching. And then for me, the pre-bedtime lightweight stretching, hip mobility has been a really, really big deal for me as improving both my back, my hips, and my knees.
Well, good for you. Yeah, because I think with the back, it sounds like you found what I found through Kelly, that a lot of back issues are actually caused or exacerbated by excess tension and lack of range of motion and mobility in the glutes, in the hips, and in the hamstrings. And so, and then another trick on that is, I don't know if you're familiar with the concept of gut smashing, but we go over that in the book Waterman 2.0. And if you just go to YouTube and type in Kelly Starrett gut smashing, you're going to find that pretty quick. And it sounds awful, doesn't it? It sounds pretty brutal, which is why his colleague Jill Miller and my good friend refers to it as abdominal massage, because it's a little bit softer and less intimidating. But really the concept holds that if you just put a ball that's probably baseball size or above, or maybe a semi-deflated kid's soccer ball would work fairly well, under your abdomen, and you lie face down on a yoga mat, then, or on a rug, and then just slowly move that ball back and forth, up and down, diagonally across the abdominal area. And this does a couple of things. There's actually, a lot of people don't know that some of the major muscle groups that contribute to back pain, low back pain, and tightness in the lower back actually insert on the front end, just below the belly button. So the psoas being a big one. And so it not only provides kind of a trigger point release for that. So if you get back tightness, it seems counterintuitive to be working that front side, but believe me, it does work. And then secondarily, what happens is you tap into the vagus nerve through that area, that abdominal area as well. And that's one of the major pathways for activating parasympathetic recovery, which is really kind of the opposite of the fight or flight state that a lot of us get stuck in. And so, yeah, as you mentioned, doing that last thing at night, probably the hip and glute exercises you're already doing, and then maybe adding in 2 or 3 or 5 minutes of this abdominal massage or gut smashing can really not just benefit you at a neurological level by activating that vagus nerve, but can also tap into the front insertion of some of these big muscle groups that are giving you hassle in the back. You just get to them through the front.
Great. Let's go from one gut smashing to another. So in addition to all your mobility work, you've also written a lot about fasting, which is clearly one of the sort of hot topics in the biohacker or health optimizer sort of category. So why don't you summarize the book that you wrote and the 2 or 3 key takeaways for that book before we get into some of the details?
Sure. So, yeah, I co-wrote this book, The 17-Hour Fast, with a gentleman by the name of Dr. Frank Merritt, who practices emergency medicine down in Florida and is also board certified in internal medicine. And really, the origin story is that his best friend Jason got the bad news that he had been diagnosed with the most aggressive form of brain cancer and was given a maximum of 6 months to live. And this didn't sit too well with Frank and some of his other colleagues in the medical community. And so they got together basically a team, a cross-discipline team of every ologist you can think of in the medical profession, and came up with a series of protocols to help Jason outlive this prognosis. And he managed to outlive it by over 7 years. And even through the chemo, they told he and his wife, you probably won't be able to have children because that often affects fertility. And they were actually able to have 2 sons. And Jason was able to practice law almost until the end. And unfortunately, the cancer did come back hard. But right before he passed, he made Frank promise that he would use what he had learned during this process of helping him to help others. And Frank made that promise. And so really the 17-hour fast is the fulfillment of that. And so, again, I am not board certified in internal medicine. I'm just the conduit. I'm just the channel here between the ideas in Frank's head, much as with Kelly or Brian McKenzie or Fergus Conley or Andy Galpin or the others I've worked with. So, he talked at me for very many hours, and I recorded and transcribed those conversations, and then that we put them into this book, The 17-Hour Fast. So that's kind of the origin story there.
And is there something unique about the 17 hours or something unique in the book that would that you could summarize for the audience?
Yeah. So, I mean, a lot of people that are familiar with fasting are probably familiar with the intermittent fasting protocol of 16-8, where you don't eat for 16 hours a day and you do eat for in that 8-hour window. So that's what we call TRE, or time restricted eating. And, there are benefits there with autophagy, which is the clearing out of dead cell matter and using decomposing cells to create new cells. There are benefits in helping to kind of get us off this addiction to sugar and maybe adjust the blend a little bit of glucose to ketones that fuel our body. But really what Frank found in his research was that I think it actually turned out to be like 16.8 hours. If you just fast for that long once a week rather than every day, that you can get, this minimum effective dose effect of all these benefits. And so I think something unique about it is, one, it only requires you to miss 1 meal a week. So you have dinner at a normal time, say 6 p.m. on a Friday, and then you just don't eat until Saturday lunchtime. But really, in their tinkering, Frank and his colleagues that came up with this protocol initially for Jason and then for others found that they could create an on and off ramp, which is to say that you reduce the number of carbs and try to eliminate simple carbs. So you're only going for complex stuff, quinoa, sprouted breads, this kind of thing. Get that carb percentage down to around 20% in your pre and post meals. And then you also reduce the size of those portions first by 25% and then eventually up to 50%. And this kind of on and off ramp effect helps you get some of the benefits of a longer fast without the psychological barrier of thinking, oh crap, I can't eat for 24 hours or 36 hours. And so that's not to knock intermittent fasting, and it's neither is it to knock longer fasts, because those have their place as well. But I think a lot of people are either intimidated by the idea of having to fast every day on an IF protocol, and or have had a bad experience with that, or doing almost like a training plan of fasting where you start with 12 hours, go to 18, 24, 36 and longer, and therefore have just thrown up their hands and said, this isn't for me, or they're a newbie, and both of those things seems like a bridge too far. So really, the research that underpins this, that Frank and his colleagues in the medical community did, found that this 17 hours just once a week of going without food can just start to reset the balance a little bit.
So it sounds like your perspective or Frank's would be that 1 day a week gets you a minimum effective dose. Do you find significant benefit if you move that to 3 days a week or 5 days a week for people who would say, I'll eat dinner, but I skip breakfast or I go till 12 o'clock every day? Have you found any sort of variant in that, and knowing that we're all a little bit different, but when you write a book about it, you have to sort of normalize for a large audience?
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I'll tell you that I started doing it pretty much every day. And I had somewhat of a bad experience in that I have a hyper fast metabolism, and just genetically, like my dad is 72 now, I think, and has the physique of like a Conor McGregor or someone like that, you know? I mean, partly it's just that he was a stonemason his entire career. So when you lift big blocks of stone every day, you're going to get pretty chiseled, I guess, and pretty strong. But it's really that kind of farm strong thing. And so maybe as a result, I really struggle to keep weight on. And I also am pretty high stress and I'm pretty driven. And a friend recently told me that for someone with my personality type, that you can really chronically elevate your cortisol level, which, we need stress to produce adaptation, right, on an acute basis. But if that stress level is chronically elevated, we start to see some problems. And so one day my wife said to me, she was like, have you weighed yourself recently? Like, you're starting to look like McConaughey, when he lost all the weight for Dallas Buyers Club. And I was like, well, that doesn't sound too good. So checked my weight and I was down to, I think, 166, which for someone who's 6'2" is probably not ideal. And so I kind of abandoned the daily intermittent fasting and really tried to pack on some good weight. And I paired this with going back to the old Simple and Sinister from Pavel, which is just doing get-ups and swings every day. And then also I added in squatting heavy for me twice a week. And I managed to put on about 26 pounds of lean muscle pretty quickly and get back more to my kind of fighting weight, I guess you could say. So I think that's just one example of, as you said, we all respond differently to various foods. I could give you a walnut or myself a walnut and we'd probably be fine, whereas my 12-year-old would need to be stabbed in the leg with his EpiPen. And it's the same with training. It may not be as dramatic as going into anaphylactic shock, but if we gave 100 people a certain training protocol, then we wouldn't necessarily just see 2 or 3 different sets of results, but we might see 70 different sets of results. And so, I think that's, for me, IF just doesn't work unless I was just doing it wrong. And it was also a really stressful year for us last year for numerous reasons. And so I think that contributed and kind of made things work. And I think I just felt like I was noticed a difference in mood stability. Not that I never get frustrated or ticked off or anything, because I sure do still. But I found it made my mood a little bit more stable to eat more regularly. So really going back to the 17-hour fast once a week for me is going to be the extent of my fasting. Whereas for someone else, I know someone like Mark Sisson, for example, or Brad Kearns, they do IF most days and it works just great for them, in which case, awesome, good for them.
Yeah. For what it's worth, I'm a every Sunday to Monday. So Monday is my fasting day. Normally, I'd say there's probably 2 to 3 other days a week that just happens where I'm skipping breakfast and therefore getting kind of a 14, 16, 18-hour fast, depending on when I might have lunch. And that seems to be working particularly well for me. And I'd say also pro tip for anybody who's over 50, like you need to start lifting weights again. It's super important, and it's made a big difference for me in my back and my hips also. I mean, I think it's a great practice for anybody, but a lot of us who might have been more endurance athletes and or collegiate athletes that lifted too much when you're young, you sort of get rid of it for the next 10, 20 years. And lifting in your 50s is very important for men and women. So how about longer fasts? Have you experimented with that? And what's the perspective on that?
I personally haven't. Frank has, and he has found some benefit from it. But you'll need to have him on the show to discuss that more, because we didn't go into it too much. But I do know other people that, will do a 24 or a 36 hour occasionally, and anecdotally have expressed that they quite like doing that periodically. But in terms of the research, he did all the research for the protocol, and then I found some additional, just kind of the latest and greatest. And I mean, I try to stay up to date with people like Dom D'Agostino, who's obviously more on the ketogenesis side, and other people of that nature. Some of the research that Rhonda Patrick shares periodically on Fan My Fitness, her website and podcast, and just kind of keep my ear to the ground a little bit. But in terms of the longer fast, no, I haven't got a great research background in that, and nor have I tried it on an anecdotal level.
A lot of people talk about cognitive benefits of fasting. Have you found any way to quantify that for yourself or other people that you've studied?
I think it was more with Frank's example is better, because I deal with words every day, and he deals with people coming in with gunshot wounds, or from car wrecks. And so he does kind of find that benefit of what you could call, I guess, ketone clarity, where the days that he said he basically fasts almost every time he has a shift at the ER, he's fasting because of the clarity that it provides. And now he does recognize in what he's told me and what's in the book that some of that could be placebo or could just be perceived benefits because of what he expected. Or there could be some element of confirmation bias in looking into all of that. But again, just anecdotally, that he feels that he is at his best to help prevent someone dying, or, help someone who's bringing in a sick, lifeless 2-year-old or what have you, that he's really has the most clarity of mind when he is doing the 17-hour fast during his work shifts. But it would be interesting to get him on, and I'm sure he could share a few pretty poignant examples of how that's benefited him and the patients that he's treated.
Yeah, it sounds great. We'd definitely love to have him. Let's turn to the one last topic that I thought was very interesting in our previous conversations around breathing. So tell us a little bit about what you've discovered there, your own personal protocols, and how others can apply specific breathing techniques to both their normal life and athletic performance.
Sure. So, I mean, first, again, a hat tip to the experts in this area. So lucky enough to do a bit of work with Patrick McKeown, who wrote the excellent book, The Oxygen Advantage, and is an advisor now at XPT. And so in working with XPT, which is the company co-founded by Gabby Reese and Laird Hamilton, the contrast therapy, breath work, these type of practices are some of their core things that they do throughout the week. And so Patrick is one of the key advisors, along with Kelly and another of my co-authors, Dr. Andy Galpin, who I co-wrote Unplugged with. And then our third co-conspirator on Unplugged is Mr. Brian McKenzie. And him and Rob Wilson, through their Art of Breath program, have really dived deep into all the different methods out there, everything from Buteyko to Wim Hof to some of the more yoga related and spiritual components of it, and have really done a deep dive there. And so just again, I'm not an expert in any of these areas. I'm not a coach in any of these areas, but I do learn a little bit by osmosis, and try to help get their ideas on the page into an audience that it can hopefully help. So, I mean, for me personally, I think two things that Brian challenged me to do. So one is to only breathe through my nose when I'm training. And he did warn me in advance that anytime I was doing, say, like a 10 times 1 minute fast with 1 minute active rest in between intervals on the rowing machine, that, or like the classic 8x500 meters with 330 rest, that keeping this nasal breathing going both during the intervals and in the interim active rest periods was going to be really hard, and I may need to back off the intensity a bit. And it did prove to be that way, or say during a heavy kettlebell swing or snatch session, the same. But I think really what he talks about is that we say that we have 5 gears. Well, when we start mouth breathing during activity, we're effectively telling the brain that, wow, we're in panic mode here. We're in 5th gear. We're working as hard as we can. And eventually that taps into what the South African Tim Noakes talks about as the central governor, which is the theory that the brain, to protect the body, will start to shut down power output. Initially it just starts to limit it like a kink in a hose, and then eventually it just makes you stop, which, in the endurance world, I guess we would call bonking, and that's self-preservatory. Well, so what Brian said is, well, you don't want to be working at, say, 2nd or 3rd gear level and yet breathing as if you're at 5th gear level and you're about to tap out. And so, yeah, it really gave me that challenge. And man, it was hard, some of those the first month. But really what I found now, that my ability to go to probably 85, 90% effort without starting to breathe through my mouth. And then once I do start, maybe breathing in through my nose and breathing out through my mouth or whatever it is, that's a more controlled tempo now. That was a really huge thing in terms of my physical practice. And then the second thing was to just do about 5 to 10 minutes at night of slow nasal breathing. And obviously you can get pretty good benefit, again, stimulating the kind of parasympathetic response that we were talking about with the gut smashing earlier, by just breathing in slow through your nose and then breathing out even slower through your nose, which is the most basic way to do it. But Brian shared this what he would call an apnea protocol that him and Rob Wilson had come up with, which is kind of a 1:3:2 ratio. And so that's start with a 5-second nasal inhale and then hold your breath for 15 seconds and then do a nasal exhale for 10 seconds. So 5, 15, 10. And just doing that lying down at night, and sometimes I stack that with reading and or listening to calming music. Like that really, I start to yawn actually after about 3 or 4 minutes, and that tells me I'm really cycling down well, which is setting me up for a restful sleep.
Where can people find out more about you online?
Well, I'm currently Kenny Kane, my cohort out at CrossFit LA/Oak Park, and I are on an extended social media fast, which we may never end up ending. And so we're all off social right now. But just check me out on my website at philwhitebooks.com.
Thanks so much for being on the show today, Phil. I really appreciate it.
Oh, well, thank you.
You've been listening to another episode of How to Live to 200. Thank you so much for joining me and exploring this world together. I get a ton of help from the L200 crew that includes Lauren Krayinsky and Kevin Kirkpatrick. The theme music is composed by Emmett McCann. Yes, that's my nephew. You can learn more about this and other episodes at our website, livingto200.com, or find us on Twitter or Instagram at howtolivето200, where we post lots of photos of cool things. It's early days for this podcast, so we would appreciate any and all comments or telling a friend or two about what we're doing over here. It might be irresponsible for you to keep it a secret. Until next time, eat right, get lots of sleep, keep good numbers, and be looking around the corner for the next big breakthrough. If we're going to live a long time, we better do it well.